Oh, I'm the one doing the intro. That's
Yes.
good to know. Excellent.
Start.
So I'm Mathieu Lachance. I'm FQA Director. I'm here with...
David Yee, with producer at Oculus Studios.
And we're going to do a little quiz with you. That's the way that we actually put our format on. The reason why I wanted you guys really close by is that you guys are actually going to vote with your arms up with 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to try to see you even though we're absolutely blinded. That starts well.
And mute.
And we're going to do our talks and back and forth that way. And without any further ado, let's start.
So the topic for us is number 1, is how long can you test in VR? You're setting up a VR lab. How long can employees last playing in one sitting? Also paying attention to the health and safety warnings. But can they play for 30 minutes? Can they play for 4 hours? Can they play for 8 hours? Or does it depend? And we can see fingers, which is awesome, which we couldn't when you were in the back. And the answer that we have is actually yes, it does depend. There's differences between what we call comfort versus sensitivity. If you are sensitive to motion in real life, you are likely sensitive to motion in VR. If you get sick in a car when you're riding along, you will probably get sick in VR on a roller coaster. And there are ways to deal with this. We talk about ginger ale. If you grew up in a household like mine, you got candied ginger or pieces of orange peel. So that's sensitivity. Comfort is another thing entirely. It's also very easy to build experiences in VR that are not comfortable just because of frame rate, because your stereo is off, because the technology just, quite frankly, you're not optimized correctly. So it's important to distinguish between those two. Your testers will be able to last, depending on how long, based on those two factors and how they overlap.
On my side, that's what we've seen as well. And the 3 factors that I need to take into account with my team are comfort, sensitivity, as David said, but also the planning around it. So comfort, yes, you got the comfort inside the app, but you have to realize that some of the games we have to test, well, you can technically stand up and you need to stand up. And having those guys stand up for 8 hours straight, that's going to be a challenge for some, for sure, and you won't be able to do it. In terms of sensitivity, there's the planning around it where, how can I say, you need a certain range of sensitivity, both within your core and non-core team. And by that, I mean your test team is actually your first line of defense. They're going to be there to also represent your market or core market to which you're going to get your game out. And you need a team that is not just hardcore in terms of what they're able to do, but that represent that market so you know what to expect within that game. And in terms of planning, well, you need to plan around that, obviously. The biggest one is if you have testers that are not able to do more than 5 or 15 minutes, what do you do with them the rest of the day? You need to cycle them, you need to assign them to another project if needs to, but if you actually absolutely need to use them, you need to plan accordingly.
What type of question should you ask a person before they join your QA team? Would you like to know if they like to swim? Should they like to fly or float through space, like in Noneko? Would you like to be thrown into space? Or are you a masochist? Oh, I like speaking at a VR conference. And the answer is all of the above, actually. Number 4, slightly more, too. We all know the power of presence and the power of VR to transport you into different places. We found that when you have experiences like horror, genres that are about fear of heights, there's a fear of talking. These things are very powerful when you put people in those experiences. And what gets to the end consumer may not be what you've developed over time. Putting your testers through those experiences can be you have to be very careful about how you do it because of their exposure to those experiences. Over time, they may become desensitized to things, where they're not reporting how those emotional impacts are affecting them anymore, or they may not be able to take it at all. So it's something you definitely need to consider putting people in, that they have to be brave and they have to be able to do many things while they're in that headset.
So the immersion, as a lot of you actually experience, is quite great. Flying, diving underwater might be awesome for some of you, might be absolutely atrocious and fearful for others. I've had experience with some testers that, no, I will not do this game. I will not work on this. While the other is like, oh, this is absolutely incredible. I'm a bird. And you don't understand that until you actually see those people and put in those situations. Obviously, if you have a large QA team, you can cycle through and plan for it. But it is something to absolutely think about and plan accordingly. And yeah. So, you're setting up a VR lab for your company. How much space do you need per employee? Normal amount, 1.5 meter wide, a little bit more than usual, 3 meter wide, a lot of space, 4 meter wide, or a whole room, more than 5 meter wide. A lot of 2, 3s. 3, a lot of space, 4 meter wide. I'm going to show you a little picture of one of my testers. No. So obviously all of them are applicable. If you are running a company though, my best tip is to try to minimize the amount of space that you require, for sure. 5+ meter is more and more accessible and possible, especially when we're talking about Gear VR, where you could walk around. And now with the possibility of room-wide Rift, it's something to take in consideration. In all of those cases, you need to review and understand the health and safety guidelines. You need to apply them. Space, movement, wires, things can go wrong. It won't if you actually follow what you're supposed to follow.
We have a rule at home and also at the event where it's never the person in VR's fault. You'll notice your BAs are really, really good. The brand ambassadors that are here at dodging fists. Some of them get hit, but they need to be aware. When it comes to us finding dedicated space, if you've been to Demo Hall 1, you can see the row of machines that we have to test multiplayer, or just demo that for you. We can't afford to have and dedicate that much space in our working environment to be able to test on a regular cadence, especially with a QA product. And so that's something to think about. That's something to think about as you build your space on your office. It's something to think about on why you might want to use an external QA resource is because they do have that space available to them. They can dedicate to that to your project at all times, and you'll get more test cycles if you have that much space.
Good. So you got a big VR project coming in, a non-Oculus one from another hardware manufacturer that will remain nameless. You order 20, how many do you get? None? 6, 12, or 20? Raise your hand and vote. Three, 4, 2, 1. It seems that averages out around 3, 12. Actually, for this specific case, the correct answer is unfortunately 2, which was not happy news and didn't make for a happy camper, especially when that demand of work grew to almost 40. Let's say that for 6 headset, it's absolutely not enough. And we actually had to refuse work. And we were lucky enough that with Oculus, that's not something that we experienced. We got like 120 sets and then some, which is plenty for what we needed. But you need to plan ahead. And a lot of you, I'm sure, have experienced this with any hardware manufacturer. A new toy comes in, the plan is not proper in terms of what the demand is going to be on the market, and then everyone is actually struggling to do it. So you need to plan ahead. You need to know who your contacts are. You need to know what the procurement process is. Sometimes you even need to know more than the client or manufacturer themselves.
The message I would stress here is efficiency. It's not uncommon when we deal with any console launch, any new hardware launch, for you have to leverage your hardware across your team. We've seen artists share one dev kit between 3 of them. We've seen touch when it was first coming out, people sharing touches and making sure that more people than one person could use them at any given time. I would also say that an advantage that we've used with QA here is in running multiple shifts. Actually, it's one of the things we talked about actually in the earlier slide. But one of the things you can do with multiple shifts is, again, getting as many people as possible to use the same hardware that you can, just to maximize your time efficiency.
Good. Question 5. A bug is being thrown back and forth between the tester and the dev, switching between statuses of not a bug and will you just open your eyes, please? What do? Ask a tester to close the issue, ask a dev to fix the issue, book an hour-long meeting, or just chug a ginger ale and call it a day? 4, of course.
I see some 3s and 2s.
A lot of 3s, a lot of 2s, some 1s. The top 3 ones are absolutely applicable. But in our case, the third one, booking an hour-long meeting, was actually often required at first. A lot less now, but still required in some cases with some of the new devs, basically because of discrepancy. So we see discrepancy in terms of 3D and 2D. Best example is that, and I'm sure some of you have experienced it, sometimes you cannot explain an issue to someone, or someone cannot understand it unless they actually have a headset on. And that's problematic sometimes. Other issues that we've seen is obviously, and that's applicable to not only VR, but if the dev is running the game from the engine and the test team is actually running the game as a standalone app, you're going to see discrepancies. You're also going to see discrepancies if you have different tools. In-app tools or external ones, they're not going to get the same results. And hardware as well. If you have a team developing a game and you only have 1 or 2 types of specs on your PC, and you're working with a QA team that have, I don't know, over 100 different permutations that can apply to it, they're going to see a whole lot of stuff that you're not seeing.
Our advice here is really to rely on your best practices as developers. Use your dev test teams, use your external QA teams. It's not uncommon for us to have engineers go to a QA tester's desk and say, hey, show it to me here, repro it for me here. The same applies to VR. So use all the techniques that you've learned on how to work with QA together to build one team to put together techniques and practices that will help you work together to solve the problems.
Good. You have some staff that are absolutely needed for a VR project. But unfortunately, they're a bit too sensitive to actually work on the project. What does your R&D team come up with? Solution 1, use the top half of a life-size mannequin with a headset and move him around the office very creepily. 2, decide that a mannequin is overkill and replace it by a block of wood. 3, is that duct tape? And 4, all of the above. Yeah, of course it is. So that's the third version of what our R&D team came up with after we found that the mannequin was a bit overkill, which is the claw, which is the bottom of a lamp and the top of some type of claw, I don't know. But it works extremely well, and sometimes it's absolutely necessary. We have some work that is not necessarily needed to be done at some phases within a 3D environment. Localization is actually a very good example. You got an extremely good German tester that you actually want him on this project because he's the best, but he doesn't want to put a headset because he just can't. Then you need to find solutions.
An example here of just the inventiveness that we've seen from the development community, and we encourage. The picture's a little dark here, but you can see this. This is actually the prototype of the camera that we're using in the green screen setup out in the lobby today. It's a chunk of wood that a developer basically modeled out and then figured out the dimensions of the device and then printed using a 3D printer. But you saw today in the keynote, we're releasing like the facial interface schematics, releasing the audio schematics. We encourage people to be inventive about how they test in 2D and 3D while not using the VR headset if they have essential staff that they need to look at things, but they just can't be in the headset that long. How many phones do you need? If you have 10 testers and you're testing a mobile VR product that runs across 4 different phone types, do you need 10 phones you need 40 phones, 80, or 200? Ooh, wide range of answers.
A lot of twos.
A lot of twos? So 4, 2? The answer is actually close to 200 in the beginning. The thing about mobile VR, especially as we look at things, is you have 2 things you have to deal with when you're dealing with products in development. You have perf and you have heat. Perf will drain battery. Heat will also affect perf because you'll start to drop frames as the phone gets too hot. You can't cool down that phone artificially. So you're constantly running these batteries down and having to swap and cycle phones in. If you look at the event staff here and all the gears that we have in development, we actually have a lot of backup phones that we cycle through because as we have all of our attendees go through these experiences, we run through phones extremely fast. Now there are some ways to deal with this, and that's probably why the number's not close to 200 anymore. As we get better at developing things, as we develop blocks of wood and things like the claw, we find that a lot of teams are actually using Rift or PC level VR to develop in most of their mobile products and then only switch to the phones when they're dealing with perf. So there are ways around this, and the inventiveness is actually exciting to see. Oh, sorry, Matt.
It is indeed getting better. And the last year we've seen a lot of changes, but in the early days it wasn't a surprise for us to actually see some alpha and pre-alpha games last 5-10 minutes before they either overheat or battery was completely drained. And you can't really do anything about it. Like as David said, you cannot change that process faster of recharge or getting it cooler. Just you run the risk of causing damage. Essentially, it's not made for that. And you need to plan ahead. And if you can cycle that tester to another project, then great, but sometimes you can't. And sometimes the only answer is to give that tester a whole big box of mobile phones and just have fun, man, and just cycle through again and again throughout the day. So, before any work happens, how much does it cost to set up VR testing for a team of 80 people? 50K, 100K, 150K, or 200K?
Fours.
Yeah, a lot of fours. And you're right. Easily 200K about a year ago. And you can see how finance sees me on the next slide. It's about a year ago, yeah, easily 200K, even a bit less. It's a lot better now, obviously. As a lot of you know, whatever high-end PC gets out now is going to be easily 50% of the cost or so in about a year. If I had to redo the same thing now, it's probably between 100 and 150. So it's already like a lot better in terms of threshold. The other thing that people don't realize is, yeah, there's some aspects of QA that are going to cost you more. Some aspects actually are going to cost you a lot less. When you check compatibility, like let's say this is the normal range from low to high end, well, this is what you need to test normally. And you're with VR and then, oh, actually we just only need to test the high end. So we only need 10 permutation. We don't need 200, 250. So that's going to cost your cost by a lot for sure.
And we've seen this cost drop when we first started it to today. We have the new, NVIDIA 1060 cards, which are awesome, which surpass our recommended spec, and those are much less expensive than they were when we first started this VR journey. The other piece to consider is a lot of people think that mobile VR is less expensive when it comes to testing. But you saw on our last slide just the sheer quantity of phones that you sometimes need to go to. Oftentimes we forget here, especially in the US, that your phone cost is subsidized. If you were to buy an unlocked phone, oftentimes these phones are $400, $500, $600. So it's not as inexpensive to be in mobile and testing through all these cycles as you might think.
In Montreal, some of the newer devices that we need to buy can easily run over $1,000. So yeah.
Something to consider when you're putting together infrastructure for your testing.
So you just started working on a new VR title with a new VR hardware with your new team. How many test cases do you need to go through to ensure everything's right? 1, 5, 10, or what's a test case? A lot of 3s, you don't vote. 10, actually the answer is what's a test case? And that was a year ago. Bear in mind that now it's quite different. But when we started, everything was new. There were no standardized testing method, no official certification guidelines, no baseline, no benchmark. Early stage hardware and games, the guidelines, the tool, and the software was constantly changing. It still is, a lot less, obviously. And a lot of these we actually had to build ourselves with Oculus, obviously. But the best example I can give is when we started working for the Oculus Ready program, we had Oculus asking us, hey, so if we do like compat cert for hardware, what do you think would be the list of stuff we need to check? Well, we think this would be great. It's the certification guideline now. Obviously, it changed a lot and improved. And if we check the overall Oculus guidelines, if I'm not mistaken, I think now we're at 132 or so, if not a little bit more. And yeah, it had to grow from something and somewhere. And what's, I would say the biggest challenge on my side is, and I don't know for some of you guys, but for certification, it's usually, by the book. And now you actually have to build something out of nothing. And it was a lot more, let's try to think how Oculus would think. Let's try to think like what Oculus would actually want in terms of end product, of culture, of how they apply things. And then us coming back to them and telling them, you know what, it's not a guideline, but we think it's not right. And we actually go, and that's from where we actually build the guidelines.
Yeah, I would say that be diligent about your documentation. Whenever you find something new or a new defect or a new bug that happens somewhere, look and see if it happens everywhere. And it's great working with Babel in the sense that comfort is very important to us. As I hit my microphone, holding that 90 frames per second is very important to us. So we provided them with tools to test and see if things are running at proper frame rate. And they've been very diligent reporting to us every time it's dropped below a certain threshold. And sometimes we talk about it, and sometimes those bugs are just, you're below 90, but it's a black screen. But they reported it anyway. And I think it's just important to be diligent about that because we just don't know the newness of VR and what it means to do these test cases. Half your team is seeing weird and erratic stuff happening in the game. Do you ask your developers what they broke? Do you ask the testers what they broke? Reinstall all firmware and software just to be safe? Or it's easy, just get Unreal, Unity, NVIDIA, Samsung, AMD, HTC, Sony, everyone on the call and talk it all out. Some 3s, I'm hearing some 4s and Snickers. The answer is 4. Right now. This is not unusual. When new hardware comes out, when new video cards come out, when any new piece of peripheral comes out. What? 3? What? No, it's 4.
It's 4.
And she works with us. You need to communicate. Finding out when driver updates happen. Get close with your DevRel partners. Talk to them and find out what their roadmaps and plans are so that you can account for things. Otherwise, you're going to end up chasing rabbits down holes for things that you may not even be able to control.
So as Dave was saying, unreleased content can behave quite erratically when new software is released, when new firmware or hardware is released, even more so when you have some components in there, sometimes more than one, that technically doesn't exist. It's not released. Why would someone actually put the effort forward to actually make it something working or compatible? And getting on a call with the majority of those guys is something that we had to do at some point. And Oculus put us in contact, and that was great. And up to the point that, right now we even have, a call once in a while, hey, we're going to put a firmware out on our video card in a month. Can you just, check it 20 minutes, make sure we don't break half of what's out there and around the world. And it's great. It gives us first dibs on a lot of stuff and a lot of experience that we didn't have before. But until most of it is actually fully released, we're going to continue seeing some of this.
How do you share VR best practices? Is it through training? Is it through preaching, delegating, or is it coming and talking at OC3? Oh, interesting.
You don't even vote.
Trick question. The only one that's wrong is preaching. And I'll say this. There are a lot of people that are preaching about VR that many of them haven't even tried VR yet. Fortunately, we're dealing with an audience here that is invested in this space and this technology. But it's important to keep talking to one another. Come to these things, come to these events, form communities, be part of tech calls, talk to us. We're happy to help anyone. One of the reasons why Oculus, especially Oculus Studios, is so invested in working with partners is we want to share this information out there. We want everyone to be successful in VR. It does us no good if we learn about all the best techniques and hoard them to ourselves. So we want to work with external QA partners. Babel is one of our key ones because we want them to be able to share those practices with other teams they might come in contact with. And the same applies to all of our development community and everyone else we work with.
So we're super lucky, actually, to be working with Oculus. For sure, I don't think we would have managed to build a VR team, or at least not as good as a VR team, if we wouldn't be working with them. The main thing is, I would say, not only they're patient, but understanding. And that's the big difference. They know the effort that is actually needed to build something like this internally. They've lived it themselves. And they've worked with other partners that have went through this process as well. So you have that understanding, you have that support. But the opposite is also true. Whatever we manage to find, whatever we manage to build, we need to share it together.